General John "Blackjack" Pershing tasked Apache Scouts from the 10th and 11th Cavalry with tracking down Pancho Villa. The pursuit of the elusive bandit and his forces ignited their warrior spirit, offering a taste of adventure. The 1880s violent Apache warfare had long since passed. By 1916, life was relatively quiet compared to the days when dozens of scouts and soldiers scoured the Southwest and Mexico for Apaches resisting reservation life. These Apache Scouts, a tight-knit group, were tough, skilled at tracking, fighting, and riding like their ancestors. However, their duties had become mundane and uninspiring. That all changed on March 9, 1916, when Pancho Villa and his angry revolucionarios boldly attacked the border town of Columbus, New Mexico. The small town along the border lay under a haze of dust devils, with no rain in sight. For 6 long years, the Mexican Revolution had brought betrayal and bloodshed to people on both sides. The brutal attack on U.S. soil was a shock that wouldn't be tolerated. Villa had miscalculated Washington's response, and though he hoped to reignite the revolution's cause of Tierra y Libertad, land and freedom, his actions backfired. The enraged bandit general severed ties with President Woodrow Wilson, frustrated with the U.S. government's indifferent approach to Mexico. Villa's fury peaked when he discovered that the U.S. was supplying weapons to his bitter enemy, Venustiano Carranza. Villa despised Carranza, viewing him as a coward and an arrogant wealthy man who gained power without truly fighting against General Huerta's corruption. Feeling betrayed by the U.S., Villa resorted to what he knew best, riding out of the shadows to launch a fierce attack, killing and wounding U.S. citizens, and leaving both his enemies and his own men dead in the aftermath. The U.S. government, typically slow to react, moved swiftly after Villa's attack. In no time, thousands of men were called to duty to capture and bring Villa and his Dorados to justice. Brigadier General Blackjack Pershing was chosen to lead this punitive expedition, also known as the Mexican Expedition. Pershing, who had gained valuable frontier experience during the Indian Wars in New Mexico, was a strict disciplinarian with strong organizational skills. To ensure the mission's success, he specifically requested Apache Scouts, knowing their unmatched tracking skills. His biggest challenge, however, was dealing with President Woodrow Wilson, who often second-guessed his military leaders from afar. The Apache Scouts had no idea that the thrilling months spent chasing Villa and working under Pershing would be the most exciting part of their remaining service. A few of the more senior Apache Scouts had fought in the Geronimo campaigns themselves or had family members who had. By 1916, only 24 scouts remained, but Pershing increased their numbers to 35 for the punitive expedition. Their final major mission once again took them into Mexico. Even after 30 years of relative peace along the border, the scouts felt uneasy about venturing into the land of their traditional enemy, the Mexicans. To them, there was little difference between friendly Mexicans and the Carranzistas or Villistas. Their instinct was to approach everyone with caution, prepared for conflict. Ace Daklugi, Geronimo's nephew, once explained to historian Eve Ball that Apaches never liked being taken by surprise. Avoiding surprise meant survival. Successful scout leaders, including Captains John G. Bourke and Emmett Crawford, and Lieutenants Britton Davis, Charles B. Gatewood, James Shannon, and H. B. Warfield, discovered that allowing some latitude in the scouts' cultural practices improved their adaptability to military life and responsibilities. Captain John G. Bourke of the U.S. Army noted that Apache Scouts in 1883 had a close bond with the natural world while on a hunt for Chiricahua Apaches. They could read every trail and sign, interpreting the stories of people and animals that had passed by. Their value lay in the skills they had learned from childhood. More than 30 years later, Captain James Shannon, who commanded the Scouts, wrote, "In order to get results, they must be allowed to work in their own way. Their extreme caution is one of the traits that makes them exceptional scouts. It would be nearly impossible to surprise a group with Apache Scouts leading the way." Shannon grew up in the East, yet he had a deep regard for his Apache Scouts. He admired their disciplined camps, the care they took with their horses, and their commitment to their traditional religious practices. They frequently used sweat lodges, and each scout carried sacred objects like Hoddentin, the revered pollen they used in daily prayers. These men, with their time-honored traditions and skills, were now on the trail of Villa and his band, who were branded as cutthroats by the American press. Although there were numerous skirmishes and incidents, two significant engagements where the Apache Scouts led the way and embraced both the combat and scouting aspects of their role took place in May and June of 1916. Historian Friedrich Katz described the action at Rancho Ojos Azules as the punitive expedition's greatest victory. This success boosted morale among the troops, and the Apache Scouts relished every moment of it. The battle gave them the chance to showcase their ability to fight just as skillfully as they could track. On May 5th, after a grueling 35-mile march, a group of Apache Scouts and members of the 11th Cavalry reached El Rancho Ojos Azules, Blue Springs, an area known to harbor many villistas. This presented a prime opportunity to engage the forces that had attacked the United States and perhaps even corner Villa himself. Julio Acosta led over 150 seasoned soldiers loyal to Villa. Major Robert L. Howes quickly assembled 6 troops from the 11th Cavalry, a machine gun unit, a pack train with 4 days' rations, and the Apache Scouts, who moved ahead as the advance guard. Facing roughly 140 American troops, the villistas fought fiercely. Astonishingly, not a single American was wounded, while over 50 villistas were reported killed and many more captured. Major Howze, determined to secure a victory, had pressed on through the night to launch a surprise attack the following morning. Just a month earlier, Howze had been forced to abandon his pursuit of Villa due to a shortage of Apache Scouts who could track the elusive bandit. The Scouts had been accused of committing atrocities, leading to a temporary suspension of their operations. Without their tracking skills, the troops were at a significant disadvantage in chasing Villa's clever and evasive dorados, causing frustration for everyone involved. This time, however, Howze felt the tide was turning. With the help of his Apache Scouts and 2 civilian guides, he sensed they were closing in. At sunrise, the forces deployed, and the charge at Ojos Azules began. According to some accounts, Ojos Azules is remembered as the last American cavalry campaign fought in the traditional frontier style. The battle was clean and nearly flawless, with dozens of villistas caught in the crossfire, showcasing the classic fighting methods of the Americanos. Major Howze, leading Troop A, was designated as the mounted advance guard for the 11th Cavalry troops. The initial plan for the Apache Scouts was to locate the villistas and prevent their escape. However, upon discovering the enemy, the Scouts couldn't resist dismounting in their traditional manner and engaged in battle until the rest of Howze's troops arrived. Reports indicated that they fought effectively alongside the regular cavalry. The charge, armed with pistols, swept through the ranch in columns of 4, forcing the enemy to flee. Other troops positioned themselves on either side of the ranch house, using the machine gun brigade to block any escape routes. The Apache Scouts eagerly led the charge against their historical Mexican foes, which was unusual since Scouts were typically expected to locate the enemy and then get out of the way. First Lieutenant S.M. Williams, the adjutant and quartermaster for the expedition, later wrote an article for the U.S. Cavalry Journal recounting the Ojos Azules fight. He said the fight lasted 20 to 25 minutes of hard fighting, punctuated by the war whoops of the Apache Scouts. The Scouts returned to camp with a haul that included saddles, bridles, captured horses and mules, ammunition, blankets, rifles, and pistols. Huli was then recorded as being said by First Sergeant Chicken, Escanadista. His soldiers agreed, saying, "Damn fine fight." It was an impressive achievement for both the Scouts and troopers, as the forced all-night march with horses and mules carrying heavy loads was challenging for both man and beast. Weary from the combat, they arrived in Ojos Azules. It was their courage and quick thinking that allowed them to work effectively together, responding with precision and speed when necessary. Horse and mule theft had become a competitive game, and it was often hard-fought. The Scouts were able to trace the villistas to Las Veras Pass, even though their trail had been gone for more than a week. Captain Shannon observed that his Scouts quickly relocated the trail after a rocky stretch had slowed them down. The Apaches spread out, and soon one of them signaled to the others, prompting them to regroup and continue the pursuit using the same technique. Within the hour, they successfully scattered the ladrones, thieves, into the mountains. There were no casualties among the men, but once again, Villa had managed to evade capture. Even though villistas made up all of the losses, Carranza's administration in Mexico City was aware of the confrontations at Hoyos Azules and Las Varas Pass. Those who fought at Hoyos Azules later admitted that facing the feared Apaches was a daunting experience. Mexico's envoy to the United States, Eliseo Arredondo, once again declared in a scathing letter to Secretary of State Lansing on June 28, 1916, that Pershing's commanders and the Apache Scouts had committed atrocities that would never be forgotten. In response, Pershing noted that such rumors had been circulating for some time, but investigations had revealed the allegations to be unfounded. General Pershing's findings have been accepted by historians ever since. Unfortunately, this controversy delayed the search for Villa by several months. Remarkably, reports from military commanders indicated that all the officers believed Villa could have been captured if the Scouts had been utilized more effectively. He said the fight lasted 20 to 25 minutes of hard fighting, punctuated by the war whoops of the Apache Scouts. Both Mexico City and Washington were equally out of touch with the realities of field conditions. Fortunate for Villa, but unfortunate for Carranza and his officials in the capital. During the 7 months spent trying to appease Carranza, the Apache Scouts engaged in various activities throughout Mexico, including tracking down American deserters, conducting general scouting and hunting expeditions, and repairing telegraph wires cut by the enemy. To keep boredom at bay, Shannon took his scouts on hunting trips, and he returned with a newfound respect for their tracking skills. Not only did they excel at finding animal tracks, but they also used their knowledge of wildlife behavior to provide fresh meat for the camp, while the white soldiers assigned to the task often struggled to do the same in the same areas. The Scouts were always successful in locating deserters. The Apaches found the invisible trail when 3 soldiers disappeared without a trace. An alert scout had spotted that a swift-moving horse had fallen into a prairie dog hole, causing a cactus fragment to break off in an odd manner farther down the trail. The Scouts operated silently and swiftly, using only hand signals. Within 24 hours, they had caught up with the deserters, and this technique proved effective time and again. Mexico was a wild, barren landscape, particularly in the vast wilderness known as the Sierra Madre. Villa was familiar with the terrain, while Pershing's troops were not. The campesinos supported Villa and his dorados, resenting the presence of gringos. Mexicans did not want Americans on their land. Therefore, Pershing's primary advantage came from the Apache Scouts, recruited much like they had been during the Apache Wars of the previous century. This was a wise choice. The punitive expedition might have been the last military operation to engage in combat, using the traditional frontier style of warfare, transitioning into a new era characterized by truck convoys and soldiers riding on mules or horseback. This change was necessary, especially when tracking down outlaws and villistas in the rugged Sierra Madre, where roads were scarce and dangerous paths wound through canyons and gorges. Pershing recognized the importance of utilizing every resource and method available to succeed in such challenging terrain. These were not just simple routes to town. They could serve as traps for his men, with Villa, Fierro, and others potentially hiding in the surrounding hills. In some instances, the Apache Scouts discovered caves stocked with supplies, ammunition, and weapons. Nevertheless, despite all efforts, Pershing was frequently outsmarted by the cunning revolutionaries. Some bloody confrontations resulted in a few captured enemies and further resentment from the Mexican residents of small pueblos, a sentiment that extended to the larger city of Chihuahua, where Pershing had his headquarters and where Villa had once operated. It was frustrating to admit that after more than 11 months in the field and town, there was still no sign of the Centaur of the North. While there were plenty of rumors and reports of swift ambushes and raids for supplies and horses, Villa remained elusive. It must have been a tough reality to face that without the Apache Scouts, they would never have gotten anywhere near José Doroteo Arango Arambola, better known as the bandit general Pancho Villa. After the punitive expedition concluded in February 1917, the Army disbanded about half of the force, retaining 22 Apache Scouts for active duty at Fort Huachuca. However, their wartime service wasn't quite over yet. Tensions between the United States and Mexican armies persisted until 1920, and Apache renegades from the Sierra Madre continued to harass ranchers into the 1930s. The Scouts also organized border patrols to ensure that cattle didn't wander into Mexico. However, The Apache Scouts may have considered their time spent serving under General Pershing during the punitive expedition to be their last hurrah.